For a long time, this is what learning project management felt like for me. I knew the words, I understood the concepts, I could follow along when people talked about projects, but underneath all of that, I was still just guessing. I was guessing what the right answer was. I was guessing what I was supposed to say in meetings. I was guessing what I was supposed to say to my stakeholders. I was guessing whether I was actually doing things the right way or not. And that's a really uncomfortable place to be because from the outside, it looks like you know what you're doing. But on the inside, you're constantly thinking, is this right? Am I missing something? Why does this still feel unclear? What confused me the most was that I was putting in the effort. I was learning, I was studying, I was trying to do things the correct way, but nothing was clicking for me. In this video, I wanna explain how I stopped guessing, not by learning more, but by learning project management in a completely different way. Because once you feel that shift happen, everything will start to feel a lot clearer for you as well, just like it did for me. But first of all, if you don't know me, my name's Eddie. I've been an IT tech project manager for the last 8+ years. I've worked across multiple different industries, including retail, banking, and manufacturing. And I've even made over $300,000 in a single year, all working remotely as a project manager from places like Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico. The hardest part about the phase that I went through wasn't that I didn't know anything about project management. It was that I knew just enough to be dangerous. I could follow conversations in meetings, I could understand the terminology that people were using, but when someone asked me a direct question or when a decision needed to be made, I could feel myself hesitating a little bit. I wasn't responding from certainty, I was just thinking through what the correct answer should sound like. I'd hear a question and my brain would immediately jump to, okay, what's the textbook answer here? Is this like a scope thing, a timeline thing, a risk thing? And that's exhausting because you're not actually thinking about the situation in front of you. You're thinking about whether you're about to say the wrong thing. And I remember sitting in meetings where I had opinions, but I'd second guess myself before speaking. Not because I didn't care, but because I hadn't seen enough real situations to trust my instinct yet. Everything felt fragile to me. If the conversation stayed inside the lines of what I'd studied, I was fine. But the moment something unexpected came up, a change, a disagreement, or a trade-off, I felt that internal pause inside of me and I didn't know what to do. And I know a lot of people watching this video right now probably recognize that feeling as well. You're doing the work, you're trying to learn the right way, but deep down, you don't feel grounded yet. You feel like you're thinking your way through every answer instead of just recognizing what's happening and answering naturally. That was the phase I was stuck in for a long time. And for a long time, I assumed the reason I was still guessing was because I hadn't learned enough yet. So I did what most people would do. I kept studying, I kept watching videos, I kept trying to fill in whatever gap I thought I was missing. And here's what it took me way too long to realize. Traditional learning didn't remove the guessing for me because it was never designed to. Most courses and certifications are built to explain how project management should work. They're clean, they're logical, they're organized, but real projects are messy. They don't give you all the information. Projects change mid-conversation. Decisions have to be made before you feel ready. When you're learning in isolation, everything feels hypothetical. You're thinking, if this happens, I would do X. If Y happens, I would do Z. But when you're inside a real project, nothing ever shows up that cleanly. So even though I was learning more, I wasn't getting more confident because confidence doesn't come from knowing what should happen. It comes from having seen enough situations that you recognize what's happening now. Traditional learning gave me information. What it didn't give me was judgment. And without judgment, every situation still felt like a brand new problem I had to think my way through from scratch. That's why the guessing never really stopped, no matter how much I studied. The moment I realized something was missing didn't happen during our course or while studying. It actually happened during real work. I remember being in a meeting where a decision needed to be made. And it was just one of those moments where the group looked around and around the room and waiting for someone to speak. And I noticed something interesting. The people who had been around projects the longest weren't rushing to sound like they knew the answer. They weren't quoting frameworks. They were simply reacting to the situation in front of them calmly. And they say things like, okay, if we do this, here's what's going to break. Or I've seen this before, this usually causes issues later. And then it hit me like they weren't thinking harder than me. They were just recognizing patterns and referring to their own previous past experiences. They weren't searching for the right answer in their head. They were drawing from things they had actually lived through. And that's when I realized something really important. I didn't need better explanations. I just needed more exposure to real situations. Up until that point, I had been trying to think my way into confidence. But the people that I respected and in whose shoes I wanted to be in, they weren't thinking faster. They were just more familiar with what was happening on the project. And once I noticed that difference, it became obvious why everything else still felt uncertain for me. It wasn't missing intelligence, I was missing repetitions. And so after that realization, the way I approached project management changed completely. I stopped asking myself, what do I need to study next? And I started asking myself a different question. I said, how can I get closer to real projects? How can I get more exposure? That sounds quite simple, but yes, it changed everything for me. Instead of learning in isolation, I focused on being around the work while it was happening. Sitting in meetings where decisions were actually being made, seeing how plans changed when reality showed up, when things went wrong, watching how experienced project managers handle certain uncertainty. I wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. I wasn't trying to sound smart anymore. I was just paying attention, and I started to notice patterns. The same types of misunderstandings between teams on different projects. The same trade-offs coming up over and over again. And something interesting happened after I got this exposure. The situations that used to make me freeze before started to feel a lot more familiar. Not easier, but just familiar. I wasn't thinking through every response anymore. I was reacting based on things I'd already seen play out. That's when learning stopped feeling fragile for me. It stopped being about remembering the right answer and started being about understanding what was actually happening in front of me. And that shift from studying to exposure is what finally moved me out of the guessing phase. This is probably the cleanest way I can explain what changed for me. There's a big difference between knowing something and recognizing something. When I only knew project management, every situation felt new. Even if it looked familiar on the surface, my brain treated it like a fresh problem every time. I'd think, okay, what PM tool applies here? What's the correct approach or methodology or framework here? What am I supposed to say here? That's called knowing project management. Recognizing feels completely different. Recognizing is when a situation comes up and you think, yeah, I've seen this before. Not exactly the same thing, but close enough that you understand the shape of the problem. You know where it usually goes if nobody steps in. You know what questions actually matter in this scenario. And you know which details you can ignore because you've seen it before. That doesn't come from intelligence. Again, it comes from repetition, from watching similar situations play out in real life again and again and again. Once I started recognizing patterns, instead of thinking through answers, everything sped up for me. Meetings felt calmer. Conversations felt more natural. I wasn't trying to perform project management anymore. I was just responding to what was happening. And that's when I realized something very important. Confidence doesn't show up because I finally learned enough. It showed up because my brain stopped treating every situation like a test. One of the biggest surprises for me was how confidence actually showed up. It didn't arrive all at once. There was no moment where I suddenly thought, okay, now I'm a project manager. What happened instead was much less dramatic. I stopped feeling rushed to provide the perfect answer. When questions came up, I didn't panic. I slowed down and just asked better questions. I noticed that I wasn't second guessing myself as much anymore. Not because I was always right, but because I understood the situation well enough to know why I was choosing a certain direction over another. And that's a big difference. Confidence doesn't come from certainty, it comes from familiarity. I've seen enough similar situations that I knew what usually mattered and what usually didn't. That made decisions and conversations much more easier. Interviews were much more easier. Even disagreements with stakeholders were easier because I wasn't defending theory anymore. I was just simply explaining decisions based on things I'd already seen play out before. And so looking back, that's what real confidence in project management looks like or feels like. Once I understood all of this, the right way to learn a project management became pretty obvious. It's not about learning more, it's about learning in the right order. And the order that actually worked for me looked something like this. So first it was exposure, being around real projects, being around project managers, being around the work actually happening, seeing how work actually moves, how decisions are made, and how projects react or how people react when things change. Not as a test, just like I was just observing. And the second is participation, helping where you can, helping where I could, working on real deliverables, setting in conversations where trade-offs were actively being discussed. This is where things will start to stick for you. And then the third is reflection, looking back and asking, why did that decision make sense? Why was that decision made? What actually caused the problem? What would I do differently next time? That loop, exposure, participation, reflection, is what turns information into judgment. And once I started learning that way, Guessing slowly disappeared. I didn't need to rush anymore. I didn't need to chase to feel ready anymore. And I just needed enough real situations for my brain to stop treating everything like a brand new problem. If I could go back and talk to myself earlier in my career, this is what I'd say. I would say that you're not behind, you're not bad at this, you're not missing some secret piece of information, you're just learning in a way that forces you to guess. Project management isn't something you figure out by memorizing more material. It's something you learn by being close enough to real work that your brain starts recognizing what's happening. Once that recognition starts to happen, the pressure comes off. You stop trying to perform, you stop chasing readiness, and you start responding to real situations with a lot more calm and clarity. And that's what learning project management the right way felt like for me. And once you experience that shift, you realize you don't need to guess anymore. You don't need to keep studying and watching videos anymore. You just need to get more exposure. So hopefully you like this video and now you know how to stop guessing in project management, how to actually gain real confidence. Give me a like, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. I have a lot more great videos to help solve your project management related problems for you guys. So subscribe to my channel. And if nothing else, I would like to invite you guys formally to step inside a live PMO. So we've built a one-of-a-kind live PMO where students like yourself, aspiring project managers like yourself are coming in, going behind the scenes, seeing how real projects are actually managed, and then managing real IT project simulations themselves, moving the projects from different phase gates, from initiation to planning to execution to closure, and then gaining real exposure to real project situations. And it's helping them gain real stories in interviews and build real artifacts that they can point to that shows that they've got real exposure and experience in project management. And that's how they're solving the problem of guessing every time when they're in interviews. So if that sounds interesting to you, so click the link below and join our live PMO. If nothing else, I'll see you on the next one.